The sun was setting over the city as small, delicate footsteps made their way along the busy street. 12-year-old Sophia Chen clutched her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as the evening breeze picked up. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and her stomach growled painfully with each step. Her dark eyes scanned the storefronts until they landed on the warm golden lights of Marcello's Italian restaurant. Sophia paused outside, peering through the large windows. Inside, people sat at tables covered with white cloths, enjoying steaming plates of pasta and bread. Her mouth watered at the sight. But what really caught her attention wasn't the food. It was the beautiful grand piano sitting silent in the corner of the restaurant. For a moment, Sophia just stood there, remembering. Her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. 3 years had passed since the accident that took her mother. But Sophia's hand still remembered every note, every piece they had learned together. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and pushed open the heavy wooden door of the restaurant. The warm air inside hit her face, carrying the smell of garlic, tomato sauce, and freshly baked bread. Sophia's stomach clenched painfully. The restaurant was packed with well-dressed people, their laughter and conversation filling the space. A few heads turned to look at her. This small girl with worn-out sneakers and a backpack that had seen better days. Sophia spotted a man in a crisp black suit moving between tables, checking on customers with a professional smile. He had to be in charge. She waited until he passed near the entrance, then stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. The man, Thomas, according to his name tag, turned and looked down at her with surprise. His eyebrows drew together as he took in her appearance. "We don't allow soliciting in the restaurant," he said firmly. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm not asking for money," Sophia said quickly. "I noticed your piano isn't being played tonight." Thomas sighed, his expression softening slightly. "Our regular pianist called in sick. It was too late to find a replacement." Sophia looked at the beautiful instrument sitting unused, then back at the restaurant manager. She took another deep breath. "Can I play for a plate of food?" There was a moment of silence. Then Thomas let out a short laugh. The sound caught the attention of nearby diners who looked over curiously. "What did she say?" asked a woman at the closest table. "She wants to play the piano for food," Thomas replied, his lips twitching with amusement. The woman looked at Sophia, taking in her tangled hair, her too small jacket, the holes in her jeans, and smiled with pity. "How sweet," she said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. More people were looking now. Someone at another table chuckled, then another. Soon several tables were watching the exchange with amused smiles. "Can you even reach the pedals?" a man in an expensive suit called out, causing his companions to laugh louder. Sophia felt her cheeks burning, but she kept her eyes on Thomas. "Please," she said quietly. "Just one song." Thomas looked uncomfortable now. The situation had drawn more attention than he'd expected. He glanced at the piano, then at the kitchen doors, clearly weighing his options. "Look, kid," he began. "Our special tonight costs $30, interrupted an older gentleman from a nearby table. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'd pay that to see what happens." "Me too," called someone else. Thomas hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine," he said to Sophia, "one song. If you're good, you get dinner. If not—" He didn't finish the sentence. Sophia nodded, relief washing over her. She followed Thomas through the restaurant, acutely aware of the eyes following her. Whispers and chuckles trailed in her wake. She heard snippets of conversation. This should be entertaining. Poor thing probably just wants attention. Maybe she'll play chopsticks. The restaurant had a slightly elevated area where the grand piano sat. Sophia climbed the 2 steps and approached the instrument with reverence. It was a Steinway, the same brand her mother had taught her on. Sophia set her backpack down carefully and adjusted the bench, which was too high for her. The simple action silenced some of the chatter. There was something in the way she moved, a quiet confidence that hadn't been apparent before. Thomas stood nearby, arms crossed. "What will you be playing?" he asked, his tone suggesting he expected her to name something simple. Sophia ran her fingers lightly over the keys, testing their weight. "Chopin," she said softly. "Ballade No. 1 in G minor." Thomas blinked in surprise. A few diners who knew classical music exchanged glances. The piece was notoriously difficult, one of the most challenging in the piano repertoire. "That's a very advanced piece," said Thomas carefully. Sophia didn't respond. She positioned her small hands over the keys, closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The opening notes floated through the restaurant, gentle, questioning. Sophia's touch was delicate but sure. As the piece progressed, her small body seemed to grow larger somehow. Her hands moved with increasing speed and confidence, bringing forth the complex emotions of Chopin's masterpiece. The laughter had stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. All around the restaurant, people were turning in their seats to watch. Sophia was lost in the music now. Her fingers flew across the keys, drawing out thundering bass notes and delicate bell-like treble tones. The piece built to its first climax, and she leaned into it, her whole body expressing what her hands were creating. A waiter stopped, plates balanced on his arm, transfixed by the performance. In the kitchen doorway, the chef and several staff members had appeared, listening with astonished expressions. As Sophia navigated the most technically demanding passages, several diners exchanged looks of disbelief. This was no casual playing. This wasn't even good for a child playing. This was mastery. The same woman who had smiled with pity earlier now sat with her mouth slightly open, her fork suspended halfway to her lips. The man who had joked about the pedals was leaning forward in his chair, his expression transformed. Sophia seemed unaware of any of this. Her world had narrowed to just the piano and the music. Her hands shaped Chopin's creation with a maturity that seemed impossible from someone so young. The emotional depth of her playing, the longing, the passion, the moments of peace and storms of feeling, filled the restaurant completely. When she reached the piece's famous coda, her small fingers handled the fiendishly difficult runs with astonishing clarity. The final chords resonated through the space, powerful and definitive. Then silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Sophia sat still, hands resting in her lap, eyes closed as the last notes faded away. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in. Within moments, the entire restaurant had erupted in applause. Several people rose to their feet. Someone whistled. The applause continued, growing louder rather than diminishing. Sophia opened her eyes, looking surprised at the reaction. She stood up shyly and gave a small bow, just as her mother had taught her. Thomas stood frozen, his face a picture of shock. When he finally moved, he approached Sophia with completely different body language. Gone was the condescension, replaced by something close to awe. "Where?" He cleared his throat, which had gone dry. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Sophia looked down at her worn sneakers. "My mom taught me," she said simply. The applause was still going. People were standing up all around the restaurant now, craning their necks to see the small figure by the piano. The older gentleman with the wire-rimmed glasses approached the piano area. He was not applauding. Instead, he was studying Sophia with intense interest. "Young lady," he said when he reached her. "That was extraordinary. I was a concert pianist for 40 years, and I've rarely heard Chopin played with such understanding. Who is your teacher?" Sophia looked up at him. "My mother was Mei-Lin Chen," she said. The man's eyes widened. Several people who overheard gasped. "Mei-Lin Chen," he repeated. "The Mei-Lin Chen? But she disappeared from the music world years ago." Sophia nodded, a flash of pain crossing her face. "She died 3 years ago." Thomas, who had been listening to this exchange, stepped forward. "I think we need to get you that dinner now," he said gently. "And perhaps you could tell us more about yourself while you eat." The older gentleman nodded. "I would very much like to hear your story," he said. "And perhaps make a phone call or two. There are people in the music world who would want to know about you." Sophia looked from one to the other, hope rising in her heart for the first time in weeks. She nodded, suddenly remembering how hungry she was. As Thomas led her to a table, the best one in the restaurant, Sophia glanced back at the piano. Her mother had always told her that music could open doors. Tonight it had opened the door to a warm meal. But from the way people were looking at her now, Sophia sensed it might have opened other doors as well. Doors that led much further than just one dinner. The same diners who had laughed at her request now watched her pass with expressions of respect and curiosity. The woman who had smiled with pity earlier caught Sophia's eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Sophia gave her a small smile in return. She understood. After all, who would have believed that a hungry girl in worn-out clothes could play Chopin like that? As she sat down at the table, Sophia felt her mother's presence strongly. "I did it, Mom," she thought. "I remembered everything you taught me." And somewhere in her heart, she felt certain her mother had heard. The best table at Marcello's was usually reserved for celebrities or regular customers who spent thousands of dollars each month at the restaurant. Tonight, it was occupied by a small 12-year-old girl with worn-out sneakers and a hungry look in her eyes. Sophia sat nervously, overwhelmed by the sudden change in how people were treating her. Just 15 minutes ago, they had been laughing at her request to play for food. Now they were stealing glances at her with expressions of awe and respect. Tomas, the restaurant manager, returned to her table with a glass of water and a basket of warm bread. "The chef is preparing something special for you," he said, his voice now gentle and respectful. "He says it's not every day Marcello's hosts a true artist." Sophia took a piece of bread, trying not to show how desperately hungry she was. She bit into it slowly, savoring the warm, soft texture. It had been days since she'd had a proper meal. "Thank you," she said quietly. The older gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses who had spoken to her earlier approached the table. "May I join you?" he asked. Sophia nodded and he sat down across from her. "My name is Dr. Harold Lynn," he introduced himself. "I taught at the National Conservatory for 30 years. I knew of your mother, though we never met in person." Sophia perked up at the mention of her mother. "You knew about her?" Dr. Lynn smiled. Anyone in the classical music world knew Mei Lin Chen. She was extraordinary, a once-in-a-generation talent. A server arrived with a steaming plate of pasta for Sophia. The aroma made her mouth water, but she tried to focus on the conversation. "Please eat," Dr. Lin encouraged her. "We can talk while you have your dinner." Sophia didn't need to be told twice. She twirled the pasta onto her fork and took a bite, closing her eyes briefly at the wonderful taste. "Your mother disappeared from the concert circuit about 13 years ago," Dr. Lin continued. "It caused quite a stir in the music world. She was at the height of her career, performing with the world's greatest orchestras, recording award-winning albums. And then suddenly she was gone." Sophia nodded, swallowing a mouthful of pasta. "She met my father at a concert in San Francisco. He wasn't a musician, he was an engineer who loved classical music. Mom always said she knew he was different because he talked to her about the emotion in her playing, not just the technical skill." She took another bite, then continued. "They fell in love and got married quickly. Mom wanted a quieter life, away from all the pressure and travel. So she stopped performing publicly and started teaching instead. She always said she never regretted it." Dr. Lin looked fascinated. "And she taught you from a young age?" Sophia nodded. "For as long as I can remember. Our house wasn't big, but Mom made sure we had a good piano. She said it was the heart of our home." As she spoke, Sophia noticed more people gathering nearby, listening to her story. Some had moved their chairs closer, while others stood discreetly at a short distance, pretending to chat while clearly straining to hear. "Your technique is remarkable," said Dr. Lin. "The way you handled the coda and the ballade, most adult. Pianists struggle with that passage." Sophia looked down at her hands, small with slender fingers. Her mother had called them perfect pianist hands. Mom was strict about technique, she explained. We would spend hours just on hand position and finger strength. But she also said that technique without feeling was just showing off. "She taught me to find the story in every piece." A woman sitting at a nearby table leaned forward. "What happened to your mother? And why are you—" She gestured vaguely at Sophia's worn clothes, her question hanging in the air. Sophia's face clouded. She set down her fork and took a sip of water. "There was an accident 3 years ago," she said quietly. "We were driving home from a student recital. It was raining. Another car crossed the center line and hit us. Mom died at the scene." The restaurant had grown quiet as people listened to her story. Several diners exchanged glances, their expressions softening with sympathy. "My father was devastated," Sophia continued. "He tried his best, but he was never the same after losing Mom. He started working all the time, sometimes taking business trips for weeks. My Aunt Lily, my mother's sister, would stay with me when Dad was away." Sophia twirled more pasta onto her fork, but didn't lift it to her mouth. 6 months ago, Dad got really sick. The doctor said it was his heart. He didn't make it. Sophia's voice trembled slightly, but she kept going. Since then, I've been living with Aunt Lily, but she doesn't really want me there. She has her own life, and she never approved of Mom marrying my dad. Dr. Lin frowned. But surely she's taking care of you. Sophia hesitated. 2 weeks ago, she told me she was moving to Europe for a job opportunity. She said she found a family friend who would take me in. But when I arrived at the address she gave me, the people there said they never agreed to anything. They let me stay one night, but said I couldn't stay longer. Tomas, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. Where have you been staying since then? Sophia looked down at her plate. Different places. There's a shelter downtown that lets kids stay for 3 nights at a time. And sometimes the library if it's during the day. The woman at the music store on Elm Street lets me practice on their pianos when they're not busy. A shocked murmur went through the listening crowd. Dr. Lin's face had grown serious. And no one has contacted social services? The authorities? He asked. Sophia shook her head. Aunt Lily told me if I did that, they'd put me in the foster system and I'd never get to play piano again. She said they'd separate me from Mom's piano forever. That's not necessarily true, said a woman in a blue dress who had been listening. I work in education and there are programs for gifted children. She was interrupted by the restaurant's front door opening with a bang. A tall woman with copper-red hair walked in, looking around frantically. When her eyes landed on the crowd gathered near Sophia's table, she hurried over. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, slightly out of breath. Traffic was terrible. Dr. Lin, is this her? Dr. Lin stood up and smiled. Right on time, actually. Sophia, this is Dr. Eleanor Wright, Dean of the Westmore Conservatory of Music. I called her while you were playing your second piece. Sophia's eyes widened. Even she had heard of Westmore. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Dr. Wright sat down in the chair Dr. Lin offered her and studied Sophia with warm, intelligent eyes. Harold called me with quite the story, she said. Said I needed to drop everything and come hear a young pianist who plays Chopin like she was born for it. She smiled. He wasn't exaggerating, Sophia blushed. Thank you, she whispered. Would you play something else for us? Dr. Wright asked. Something of your choice this time? Sophia nodded, actually feeling eager to return to the piano. When she was playing, everything else faded away. Hunger, worry, the uncertainty of where she would sleep that night. She walked back to the grand piano, the restaurant patrons parting to let her through. This time there were no snickers or whispers, only respectful silence. Sophia sat down at the bench and thought for a moment. Then her hands found the keys, and the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the restaurant. Where Chopin had been passionate and complex, this piece was like moonlight itself, delicate, ethereal, washing over the listeners in gentle waves. Sophia played with her eyes closed, letting the music transport her to a peaceful place where her parents were still alive, where she was safe and loved. When she finished, the applause was different from before, not shocked or surprised, but deeply appreciative. Some people had tears in their eyes. As Sophia returned to the table, Dr. Wright was watching her with an expression of wonder and something else, recognition. I knew your mother, she said quietly, when Sophia sat down. Not just knew of her, I actually knew her. I was her instructor at Juilliard for 2 years. Sophia's heart jumped. You taught my mother? Dr. Wright nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. She was my most brilliant student. And hearing you play just now, it was like hearing her again. You have her touch, her phrasing. She shook her head in amazement. But you also have something of your own, something quite special. Tomas appeared with dessert for the table, a beautiful tiramisu and 3 forks. On the house, he said with a genuine smile. As they shared the dessert, Dr. Wright and Dr. Lin exchanged meaningful glances. Finally, Dr. Wright turned to Sophia. Sophia, we need to talk about what happens next. A talent like yours can't be sleeping in shelters or libraries. The Westmore Conservatory has a dormitory for students. And we have scholarship programs. But I'm not a student there, Sophia interrupted, though hope was beginning to rise in her chest. Not yet, said Dr. Wright with a smile. But we can arrange an audition very quickly. And given what I've heard tonight, I don't think that will be a problem. Dr. Lin nodded in agreement. In the meantime, there are emergency placement options. I know people at family services who can help navigate this situation properly. You won't lose your connection to music, Sophia. In fact, quite the opposite. For the first time in 2 weeks, maybe for the first time since losing her father, Sophia felt something like peace settle over her. She looked around the restaurant, at all the kind faces now watching her with hope and expectation instead of amusement or pity. Her mother had always told her that music was a universal language, that it could speak when words failed. Tonight, Sophia's music had spoken for her in ways she never could have imagined. What had begun as a desperate request for food had turned into something much more. The first notes of what might be a new beginning. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady and clear. "I would like that very much." The week leading up to Sophia's audition at Westmore Conservatory passed in a blur. The video of her playing at Marcello's had now reached over 2 million views, and several news outlets had picked up the story. Dr. Wright had been fielding calls from reporters, music agents, and even a few record labels, all wanting to speak with the homeless piano prodigy. "It's overwhelming," Dr. Wright admitted as she set down her phone after yet another call. "But we don't have to respond to any of this right now. Your audition and your legal situation come first." Sophia nodded, grateful for Dr. Wright's protective stance. The attention made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Her mother had always been the performer in the family. Her mother's piano now stood proudly in Dr. Wright's living room. The movers had handled it with care, and a piano tuner had come the same day to make sure it was perfectly adjusted. Sophia spent hours each day practicing for her upcoming audition, losing herself in the music that connected her to her parents. On the morning of the audition, Sophia woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves. Dr. Wright had helped her select a program that would showcase her technical abilities as well as her emotional depth: a Bach prelude and fugue, a Mozart sonata, and the Chopin ballade that had changed her life at Marcello's. "Remember," Dr. Wright said over breakfast, "the committee already wants to accept you. This is just a formality." Sophia nodded but couldn't help feeling anxious. This wasn't just any music school. It was Westmore, where some of the greatest pianists in the world had studied. And she would be playing on her mother's former teacher's personal grand piano. They arrived at the conservatory an hour early. The campus was beautiful. Historic brick buildings covered in ivy with modern additions that blended seamlessly with the old architecture. Students carrying instrument cases hurried across the grounds, some casting curious glances at Sophia. Had they seen the video? Did they know who she was? Dr. Wright led her to a practice room to warm up. "Take your time," she said. "I'll come back in 45 minutes to bring you to the auditorium." Left alone with a sleek black upright piano, Sophia took a deep breath and began her scales. The familiar routine calmed her nerves, and she gradually moved through her warm-up exercises until her fingers felt loose and responsive. When Dr. Wright returned, Sophia felt ready. They walked together to the auditorium, a beautiful space with perfect acoustics and a stunning Steinway concert grand on the stage. 5 people sat in the front row, 3 men and 2 women, all with the serious expressions of professional musicians. Dr. Wright introduced them as the audition committee, including the heads of the piano, theory, and composition departments, and this, Dr. Wright said, gesturing to an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, "is Professor Yumi Tanaka, our professor emeritus and former head of the piano department." The woman's eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in Sophia. She nodded slightly but didn't smile. Dr. Wright gave Sophia an encouraging pat on the shoulder before joining the committee in the front row. Sophia walked to the piano, adjusting the bench to her height. Her heart was pounding, but as soon as her fingers touched the keys, a familiar calm washed over her. This was where she belonged. This was her language. She began with Bach, the complex mathematical patterns creating a foundation of order and structure. The Steinway responded beautifully to her touch, its tone rich and full. She could feel herself settling into the music, her nerves fading away. The Mozart sonata followed, its playful melodies dancing from her fingers with crystalline clarity. She caught a glimpse of the committee members as she played. They were leaning forward, their faces intent. Even Professor Tanaka's severe expression had softened slightly. When Sophia launched into Chopin's Ballade No. 1, she closed her eyes, letting the music carry her. This piece had been her mother's favorite, and Sophia had heard her play it countless times throughout her childhood. Every phrase held memories. Her mother's hands moving across the keys, her face transformed with emotion, the way she would explain each musical decision to Sophia afterward. By the time she reached the coda, Sophia was no longer thinking about the committee or the audition. She was playing for her mother, for her father, for herself. The final chords rang through the auditorium, powerful and resolute. There was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. Sophia opened her eyes to see the committee on their feet, applauding enthusiastically. Even Professor Tanaka was standing, her eyes glistening with what looked suspiciously like tears. Dr. Wright was beaming as she approached the stage. "That was extraordinary, Sophia. Absolutely extraordinary." The committee members surrounded her, offering congratulations and asking questions about her training and background. Sophia answered politely, but she kept glancing at Professor Tanaka, who remained slightly apart from the group, watching her with an unreadable expression. Finally, the elderly professor approached. "You play very much like your mother," she said, her voice carrying a slight Japanese accent. "But also differently. She was fire. You are water, fluid, adapting, but with great power beneath the surface." Sophia's breath caught. "You knew my mother too?" Professor Tanaka nodded. "I was her first teacher at Juilliard before Eleanor." She gestured toward Dr. Wright. "Mei Lin was my most gifted student until she disappeared from the music world. I often wondered what became of her talent." She looked directly into Sophia's eyes. "Now I see. It lives on in you." The committee excused themselves to deliberate, though Dr. Wright assured Sophia it was merely a formality. While they waited, Professor Tanaka invited them to her office for tea. The professor's office was lined with books, scores, and framed photographs of her with famous musicians throughout her long career. As she prepared tea in a traditional Japanese set, Sophia noticed a photo on the desk, a much younger Professor Tanaka standing next to a teenage girl with a serious expression and long black hair. "Is that my mother?" Sophia asked, picking up the frame. Professor Tanaka nodded. "Her first competition win. She was 15. She handed Sophia a delicate teacup. She had the same look in her eyes that you have now, determination mixed with sensitivity. It is a rare combination." Sophia studied the photo, drinking in the sight of her mother as a young girl. "I have so few pictures of her when she was young," she said softly. Professor Tanaka opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a small album. "These are photographs from her time at Juilliard. I kept them, hoping someday she might return to music. Perhaps you would like to have them." Sophia accepted the album with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Dr. Wright entered with a wide smile. "It's official," she announced. "Sophia has been accepted into Westmore's Young Artist program with a full scholarship. She'll start classes next month after the spring break." Professor Tanaka nodded as if this were exactly what she had expected. "And her living situation?" she asked. Dr. Wright's smile faltered slightly. "We're still working through the legal processes. The court has granted me temporary guardianship, but her aunt is contesting it." Sophia's heart sank. She had almost forgotten about Aunt Lily in the excitement of the past week. The CPS worker, Mrs. Patel, had finally managed to contact her in Europe, and apparently, she wasn't happy about the arrangement with Dr. Wright. "She doesn't even want me," Sophia said, frustration creeping into her voice. "She just doesn't want anyone else to have me either." Professor Tanaka set down her teacup with a decisive click. "This aunt," she said. "What is her interest in Sophia's musical education?" "None whatsoever," Dr. Wright replied. "In fact, she's been quite dismissive of it." Professor Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. "The court should hear testimony about what is best for Sophia's extraordinary talent. A gift like hers requires proper nurturing. To place her with someone who does not value her music would be a crime against art itself." Dr. Wright's eyes lit up. "Yumi, would you be willing to provide a statement to that effect? Your reputation in the music world carries significant weight." "Of course," Professor Tanaka said without hesitation. "And I will reach out to others who have heard her play or seen the video. The music community must stand behind this child." Sophia looked between the two women, feeling a surge of hope. These people, these strangers who had entered her life just days ago, were fighting for her future with more passion than her own aunt ever had. The next day, Sophia received a call from Mrs. Patel. The CPS worker sounded excited. Professor Tanaka nodded as if this were exactly what she had expected. "And her living situation?" she asked. Dr. Wright's smile faltered slightly. "We're still working through the legal processes. The court has granted me temporary guardianship, but her aunt is contesting it." Sophia's heart sank. She had almost forgotten about Aunt Lily in the excitement of the past week. The CPS worker, Mrs. Patel, had finally managed to contact her in Europe, and apparently, she wasn't happy about the arrangement with Dr. Wright. "She doesn't even want me," Sophia said, frustration creeping into her voice. "She just doesn't want anyone else to have me either." Professor Tanaka set down her teacup with a decisive click. "This aunt," she said. "What is her interest in Sophia's musical education?" "None whatsoever," Dr. Wright replied. "In fact, she's been quite dismissive of it." Professor Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. "The court should hear testimony about what is best for Sophia's extraordinary talent. A gift like hers requires proper nurturing. To place her with someone who does not value her music would be a crime against art itself." Dr. Wright's eyes lit up. "Yumi, would you be willing to provide a statement to that effect? Your reputation in the music world carries significant weight." "Of course," Professor Tanaka said without hesitation, "and I will reach out to others who have heard her play or seen the video. The music community must stand behind this child." Sophia looked between the two women, feeling a surge of hope. These people, these strangers who had entered her life just days ago, were fighting for her future with more passion than her own aunt ever had. The next day, Sophia received a call from Mrs. Patel. The CPS worker sounded excited. "Sophia, I have some interesting news. We've received dozens of letters from musicians and music educators all over the country, all advocating for your placement with Dr. Wright. Even the governor's wife, who sits on the Arts Council, has expressed interest in your case." Sophia held the phone tightly. "What does that mean?" "It means the judge is taking notice. Family court cases don't usually get this kind of attention. I think it significantly improves our chances of making the current arrangement permanent, especially since your aunt hasn't shown much actual interest in caring for you." After the call, Sophia sat at her mother's piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. The past 10 days had been a whirlwind that had completely transformed her life. From homeless and hungry to having a roof over her head, her mother's piano, and now acceptance to one of the best music schools in the country. She began to play softly, a simple melody that came to her as she reflected on everything that had happened. The notes flowed from somewhere deep inside, forming a new piece that spoke of loss and discovery, fear and hope. Dr. Wright appeared in the doorway, listening with a gentle smile. When Sophia finished, she asked, "Was that your own composition?" Sophia nodded, slightly embarrassed. "Just something that came to me. It's not very good." "On the contrary," Dr. Wright said, sitting beside her on the bench. "It's quite beautiful. Your mother composed as well, you know. Not many people knew that about her. She kept her compositions private, playing them only for those closest to her." Sophia felt a new connection to her mother blooming inside her. "Do you think—" She hesitated. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Dr. Wright wrapped an arm around Sophia's shoulders. "Without a doubt. But not just because of how beautifully you play. She'd be proud of your resilience, your courage in the face of tremendous loss. Those qualities shine through in your music. Sophia, that's what touches people's hearts when they hear you play." Sophia leaned against Dr. Wright's shoulder, feeling for the first time in months that she might have found not just a guardian, but a new family, one bound together not by blood, but by a shared love of music and understanding of what it meant to speak that universal language. Outside, a reporter stood on the sidewalk, hoping for a glimpse of the young pianist whose story had captured the world's imagination. But inside, Sophia was simply a girl finding her way back to herself, one note at a time. 6 months had passed since the night Sophia had walked into Marcello's restaurant and asked to play for a plate of food. On this warm autumn evening, she stood backstage at Westmore Conservatory's main concert hall, peering through the curtain at the packed auditorium. "Nervous?" asked Dr. Wright, adjusting the simple but elegant black dress they had chosen together for Sophia's first formal recital. Sophia nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. The hall was filled with hundreds of people, Students, faculty, and members of the public who had purchased tickets within hours of them going on sale. In the front row sat Professor Tanaka, her silver hair gleaming under the lights, and beside her Mr. Chen, the kind landlord who had protected her mother's piano. Even Thomas from Marcello's was there with his family, beaming with pride as if he had personally discovered her talent. "Everyone out there is on your side," Dr. Wright reminded her gently. "They're here to celebrate you." Sophia took a deep breath, thinking about how much her life had changed. The court had made Dr. Wright her permanent guardian 3 months ago, after Aunt Lily finally dropped her contest when faced with overwhelming support for Sophia's placement with someone who understood her musical gifts. Sophia now lived in Dr. Wright's home, which had been transformed by the addition of her mother's piano and, more recently, many of her parents' belongings that had been in storage. She attended regular classes at Westmore's preparatory division, studying music theory, composition, and history alongside her piano training. Her teachers were consistently amazed by her natural ability and work ethic. Professor Tanaka had even taken a special interest in her development, coming out of semi-retirement to work with her once a week. 5 minutes, the stage manager called softly. Sophia nodded and closed her eyes, mentally reviewing the program she would play tonight. She had chosen pieces that told the story of her journey, beginning with the Chopin ballade that had changed her life at Marcello's, continuing with works that expressed loss and discovery, and ending with her own composition, which Professor Tanaka had encouraged her to include. "There's one more surprise," Dr. Wright said, breaking into her thoughts. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you before you perform, but I think it might give you strength." Sophia looked up questioningly. "A woman arrived just a few minutes ago. She flew in from Vienna this morning." Dr. Wright hesitated. "She says she's your grandmother, your mother's mother." Sophia's eyes widened. "Mom's mother? But Mom always said her parents disowned her when she chose to marry Dad and leave her concert career." Dr. Wright nodded. "That appears to be true. But your grandmother says she regretted that decision every day after your mother's death. She's been trying to find you since she learned about your father's passing. But your aunt made that difficult. She only discovered where you were because of the videos of your playing that went viral." Sophia felt a storm of emotions. Curiosity, anger on her mother's behalf, but also a flicker of hope. A grandmother. Another connection to her mother. Another piece of her family that wasn't entirely lost. "Where is she?" Sophia asked in the audience. "Third row, aisle seat. She has your mother's eyes." Dr. Wright looked at Sophia carefully. "You don't have to meet her tonight if you don't want to. This is your moment and nothing should distract from that." Sophia thought for a moment. "No, I want to know she's there. Maybe it will help me play better knowing another piece of Mom is listening." The stage manager appeared again. "It's time." Sophia hugged Dr. Wright tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Then she walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. The audience applauded as she made her way to the gleaming concert grand. She adjusted the bench, took a moment to center herself, and then looked out at the audience. Her eyes found Professor Tanaka first, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then she scanned to the third row and immediately saw the woman Dr. Wright had described. Even from this distance, Sophia could see the resemblance to her mother. The same delicate bone structure, the same straight posture. The woman was elegant, in her 70s perhaps, with silver-streaked black hair and an intense gaze that was fixed on Sophia, with what looked like hunger and hope. Sophia took a deep breath and turned back to the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and then she began to play. The Chopin ballade flowed from her fingers with even more depth and nuance than before. She was no longer the desperate girl playing for a meal. She was an artist telling her story through another composer's notes. The piece that had once been her plea for help was now her statement of arrival. As she moved through her program, Sophia could feel the audience responding to every phrase, every emotional shift. They were with her on this journey, feeling what she felt, understanding what words could never express. When she reached her own composition, a piece she had titled From Hunger to Home, Sophia felt a new kind of vulnerability. These were her own musical thoughts, her personal language. The composition began with sparse, uncertain notes that mirrored her days of homelessness. Gradually, it built into more complex harmonies as other voices entered. Dr. Wright, Professor Tanaka, and all the others who had helped transform her life. The final section incorporated subtle echoes of her mother's playing style, a musical homage that those who knew Mei Lin Chen's work might recognize. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation that washed over Sophia like a wave. She stood and bowed, her eyes misting with tears of joy and gratitude. As she looked out at the audience, she saw that her grandmother was weeping openly, one hand pressed to her heart. After 3 curtain calls, Sophia finally left the stage, her heart full to bursting. Dr. Wright was waiting with a bouquet of white lilies, her mother's favorite flower. "That was magnificent," Dr. Wright said, embracing her. "Your parents would be so proud." Sophia clutched the flowers, still riding the high of the performance. "Can I meet her now?" "My grandmother?" Dr. Wright nodded. "She's waiting in the green room. Her name is Ling Chen. She brought something that belonged to your mother." The green room was quiet compared to the still buzzing auditorium. When Sophia entered, the elegant older woman stood up immediately, her eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "You look so much like her," Ling Chen said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you play even better." Sophia didn't know what to say. This woman had rejected her mother, caused her pain, but she was also a connection to her past, a link in a chain that Sophia had feared was broken forever. "I made a terrible mistake," Ling continued. "I put pride and ambition above my daughter's happiness. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a velvet pouch. This was hers. She left it behind when she chose to follow her heart. "I've kept it safe, hoping someday to return it to her. Now I give it to you." Sophia accepted the pouch and carefully opened it. Inside was an antique jade pendant on a gold chain. The jade was carved into the shape of a piano. It was a gift from her teacher when she gave her first public recital at age 10, Ling explained. She treasured it. Sophia ran her finger over the smooth stone, another tangible connection to her mother. "Thank you for bringing it," she said softly. "I have so much to make up for," Ling said. "So many years lost. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope you might allow me to be part of your life in some small way." Dr. Wright, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner. Marcello's has reserved a table for us to celebrate tonight." Sophia smiled at the mention of Marcello's, the place where everything had changed. "I would like that," she said, looking at her grandmother. "I have a lot of questions." "And I have many answers," Ling replied. "And perhaps some stories about your mother that you haven't heard." As they left the conservatory together, Sophia was stopped repeatedly by audience members wanting to congratulate her and ask when her next performance would be. A music critic from a major newspaper requested an interview. A representative from a recording company handed Dr. Wright a business card. It was all so different from that rainy night 6 months ago, when Sophia had walked the streets alone, hungry and afraid. She had gone from being invisible to being seen, truly seen, not just as a homeless girl or a piano prodigy, but as Sophia Chen, a young artist with a voice of her own. Later that evening, as she sat at Marcello's surrounded by her new family, Dr. Wright, Professor Tanaka, and now her grandmother, Sophia couldn't help but smile at the symmetry of it all. She had entered this restaurant desperate and alone, asking to play for a plate of food. Now she was being served the finest meal on the menu while the owner himself hovered nearby, proudly telling other diners about the night he had discovered her. "Marcello is renaming a dish after you," Thomas told her with a grin. "The Sophia special. Best pasta in the house." Sophia laughed, enjoying the moment of lightness, but beneath her joy was a deep current of gratitude and wonder at how her life had transformed. After dinner, they all returned to Dr. Wright's home, Sophia's home now too. Her grandmother would be staying in the guest room for a week before returning to Vienna, though she had already mentioned possibly looking for an apartment nearby. Before going to bed, Sophia sat at her mother's piano in the soft lamplight. She placed the jade pendant on top of the piano, where her mother might once have put it. Her fingers found the keys, playing softly so as not to disturb the others. She played a simple melody, not a famous composition or even her own creation, but an improvisation that spoke of her journey from desperation to belonging. As the notes filled the quiet room, Sophia felt the presence of both her parents, not in a supernatural way, but in the legacy they had left her. Her mother's music, her father's kindness, their shared love that had created and shaped her. She was no longer a girl who had to ask to play for a plate of food. She was a young artist with a full stomach, a safe home, and most importantly, a future filled with music. And as her fingers danced across the keys in the quiet house, Sophia knew that this was not the end of her story, but rather the true beginning.